to read this. It won't protect you from COVID-19, but it'll sure help you with social distancing. I don't know why. I think I was very tired when I was reading this and found it to be pretty funny. But so with that, what we're going to do is turn things over to our two esteemed speakers, and I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction to Michelle and to Katie. So Michelle, your name is up there, but you want to wave. Michelle has been at FCPS for about 5 years, coming from many other experiences across the country, and she focuses on trauma, behavioral challenges, and social emotional needs for students. And she's been a trauma trainer, especially supporting students with dyslexia. And she does have experience in working with students all the way through high school, from kindergarten, and herself has 4th and 7th grade daughters. So we connect on our 7th grade daughter, or excuse me, you have a son in 7th grade, but I have a 7th grade daughter, or 7th graders. And so she has a lot of experience, her own personal experience. Katie, who comes to us also from FCPS, has her graduate degree in psychology and from Brigham Young, and has presented at psychological conferences on social emotional learning. She moved to Northern Virginia about 4 years ago, and I think rather recently married. So we're very excited for you for that. And she's also a psychologist at a middle school in FCPS. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to both Michelle and Katie. And Katie, I know as I stop my sharing and Michelle brings her slides up, I'm going to, I know you guys have some introductions that you want to do on your own.
Yeah, thank you so much, Debbie. Like she said, I'm Katie Hidalgo. I'm a school psychologist for Hughes Middle School, which is in Reston, Virginia. And so kind of representing some of the secondary level here today. And then we also have Michelle Scales.
Hi, I'm Michelle Scales, and I'm a school psychologist with Mason Crest Elementary School and Sleepy Hollow Elementary School.
Thanks. So we're actually going to start off today with a comic strip, like Debbie, something a little bit humorous. So you can see from this comic, when it pops up, here we have a teenage boy, Jeremy, who is coming home from school, and like many moms, asks him how his school day is. And he responds, "Oh, it's been so busy. There's so much going on. I don't know what to tell you first." So for many moms out there who have kids in late elementary school, secondary level kids, this is usually the response you want, but not usually the response you get. You might get a fine, a good, whatever, maybe a grunt if you're lucky. Because by that time, usually communication with teenagers seems to whittle down a bit. We don't have our loquacious 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds going on and on and on about all the things that their peers did at school that day. So today we wanted just to talk about effective communication and how to build a rapport with our kids. And it starts off with first dealing with feelings and some of those difficult situations that they come across. How can we get them to open up to us when they necessarily don't want to? And before we talk about things and the strategies that we're going to share with you today, something that's important for any type of communication is before we deal with someone else's feelings, we first have to deal with our own. So before you try to implement any of these strategies, we always recommend doing kind of a check yourself moment. Am I in a good headspace? Am I in a good emotional space right now to be dealing with someone else's feelings? Maybe we need to take a mindful moment for ourselves or step away for a second, just so that we don't intensify the situation with our own reactions or with our own feelings. So on this next slide, we're going to talk a bit about common conversations that you might see happen between a child and a parent. So you can reflect to yourself a little bit right now about maybe some similar conversations you've had. So a child saying, I don't know if I want to go to college. And a parent, very genuinely responds like, "Oh, don't be ridiculous. Of course you're going to go to college." Another child could say, "Why do I always have to take out the garbage?" And the parent just says, "Stop complaining and just do it." a child could say something like, I'm so worried. This might be something you might hear right now in terms of the pandemic, what's going on with school, maybe something going on with a family member. And as a parent, we're trying to calm those worries by saying something like, don't be worried. You don't have to be worried about anything. A child could say something like, I hate distance learning. And a parent might say like, no, you don't, you love school. And with these conversations, we're really, it's not like we're doing anything bad or, we have good intentions when we have these responses. We're trying to help our child to, we're giving them the solution or trying to help them feel more comfortable and more happy. But in return, what we're doing is we're actually invalidating their feelings and we're invalidating their experiences. So here on the next slide, you can see that when we invalidate feelings, we're often saying something like, she isn't, she shouldn't be, she's overreacting, she's being dramatic. I see that a lot in middle school. We have a lot of dramatic girl middle schoolers. She's having a bad attitude, she's being manipulative. That's a common one I hear a lot. Or it's silly to feel this way. And we think that because from our parenting perspective, it makes sense to us. Like we see the big picture, but our kids are embedded in a different perspective of their life. They don't have the same sort of life experiences or haven't gone through the same situations that we have. They're still learning these things. And so when we invalidate their feelings by trying to give a solution or response or advice or guidance right away, we're failing to teach them three things. And the first is to label their private experiences or label their emotions. So Michelle was telling me earlier this week that in elementary school, what they call it is they actually call it name it to tame it. So teaching kids to name their feelings in order to control or to regulate their feelings. So that's a really good way to think about it if you're kind of working on these skills with an elementary school child. When we invalidate feelings, it also fails to teach children to trust their private experiences as valid, that what they're going through and what they're feeling in that moment is actually a really valid response. And we probably agree with that, but the response that we're giving them is not telling them that it's valid. And lastly, when we invalidate, it fails to teach them how to regulate their emotion or tolerate distress. I think the most important skill or attribute that a child can gain or learn or ability to have is the ability to have resiliency and to work through difficult experiences. But when we're so quick to give advice or so quick to downplay what they're feeling, it fails to build that resiliency and that strength within them and those coping skills that they're going to need when we're not there to help them out. So Michelle's now going to talk about some common themes that come up in parenting experiences.
Okay, so some common themes that can disrupt our open communication with our kids, or really anyone, include dismissing their feelings, criticizing with judgment, or criticizing their judgment, or giving unsolicited advice. And so it's obviously natural for parents to want to push away these painful feelings for our kids and impose adult logic. We just want our kids to feel better, and we also want to clarify what's really happening for them based on our adult view. But it's really important for us to be able to accept those uncomfortable feelings for our kids so that they can learn how to cope with them. So instead of making feelings go away, we want to help them to learn to deal with them. So our ultimate goal is to build that emotional tolerance and resiliency, which means that they'll have the tools to handle the challenges on their own, and it'll reduce how it constricts and impairs their lives in the future. So the more we try to deny or compress those feelings, the more they're going to come back. And that's true for us too. If we want to ignore certain negative feelings, they're not going to go away until we work through them and resolve them. So it doesn't mean that we're saying that the behaviors that our kids are showing are okay. So there's a common saying that all feelings are okay, but all behaviors aren't. So by validating feelings, we're not saying that we agree with what they're doing. We're merely validating that we understand and believe that they feel the way they do in the moment. It also doesn't mean that their feelings are healthy or helpful. So that's something that we can work through with them once they've gotten through identifying their feeling. So, validation communicates that your child's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors make sense in the context, even if they're maladaptive. So validation doesn't mean that you're condoning their actions. It's just empathy and conveying that you understand how they feel and how their feelings make sense given their perceptions of the situation, as accurate as or as distorted as they may be. It doesn't mean that you agree with their perception. There's just a reason for doing what they did, and that reason made sense to them in that context. We also need to resist the temptation to change unpleasant feelings right away. It's okay to recognize how your child is feeling and why. There's nothing right or wrong about having a feeling, it just is. What we do with that feeling is what may be something that we need to work on with our kids. So if your child is feeling embarrassed about crying, an invalidating response might be, don't cry, you don't have to feel embarrassed. But that is the way they're feeling in that moment. So to validate, we could say, I can see that you're feeling embarrassed, and I want you to know that you're safe. So I can see why you think, feel, or act this way is a good general script. So again, it doesn't mean that there isn't a consequence depending on the behavior that occurred due to the feeling, or that you agree with the thoughts that are driving their feeling. So I'm sure we can all think of moments when we've done something that we wouldn't necessarily agree with based on our own emotions. I know a lot of us sometimes stress eat, or we lose our tempers, or we avoid situations that are anxiety provoking. So our feelings really drive a lot of our behaviors. But until we can recognize our feelings, we won't be able to change our behaviors. So it's okay for our kids to have any of those feelings as well as ourselves. And when they're having those feelings, we can simply say, it sounds hard to have those feelings. So you're not necessarily agreeing, you're just validating. So how is validation useful? So it counteracts the notions that your child's thoughts, feelings, and/or behaviors are wrong. It helps them to validate themselves, and it makes change efforts easier to tolerate for them. So validation is often a prerequisite for change. So our kids, just like ourselves, we don't want to have these negative feelings. So we can respond by saying something like, it must be difficult to have these feelings or to share them, and I'm grateful that you did. So just acknowledging that they have that feeling, and it's okay that they have that feeling and that you're there for them. So again, these approaches communicate that feeling that way isn't wrong. We want our kids to validate their own feelings and thoughts and not always look for us for approval. Otherwise, they are going to continue to come to us and say, I'm fine, because fine obviously really isn't a feeling. So we want them to come to us with real feelings. So we all have uncomfortable feelings at times, but it's how we react to them that matters, and sharing them is a positive way to deal with those emotions.
Oh, this got a little mixed up, but that's okay. So like Michelle was saying, when we validate, it counteracts the notion that the child's thoughts, their feelings, or even their behaviors are all wrong. And it actually helps them learn to validate themselves. So it helps you get to the change that you want to see in them, like Michelle was saying, but it also creates an openness for them to have a conversation with you. So all of this is really nice in theory and strategy, but it's also helpful to have some examples. So we're gonna have a few examples of kind of a what not to do versus a what to do, or what kind of phrases or statements you could use to open up some of that openness and communication with your child. So as a middle school psychologist, I get to deal a lot with first breakups. It is a very distressing part of my job. I get to live my own first breakup a lot based on the empathy that I'm using. So here we have an example of a girl who is upset because her boyfriend broke up with her. So the parent starts off with, why are you crying? And the daughter's saying, I don't want to talk about it. And the parent says, and we've probably all said this at some point, you'll feel better if you talk about it, which is true, but it's also kind of pushing them and forcing them to open up if maybe they're not ready to yet. But the daughter might still respond, Scott dumped me. And the parent's like, he what? Oh, well, good riddance. I never liked him anyway. And the daughter's like, well, I did, which is why I was dating him. And the parent says, forget about him. You'll have plenty of other boyfriends, or, there's, plenty of other fish in the sea. You're just in middle school. And the daughter, is living through this grief, and she's like, I can't forget about him, and I don't want to forget about him. And at that point, you're kind of at a standstill, like, oh, she's being so dramatic and emotional is probably what you're thinking. But what we're doing here is we're kind of dismissing those feelings instead of labeling the emotion and showing empathy. So a better way to go about this on the next slide is to show empathy by rephrasing and reflecting. So instead of asking them why they're crying, a good thing to say would be to say something along the lines of, I can see that like you're not doing well or that you're unhappy. And that opens up the daughter to share with you, Scott dumped me. And, showing empathy in that moment and saying, no wonder you're so upset. That's such a difficult thing to go through. And the daughter responding, I should have seen it coming. He was always flirting with other girls. And the parent, again, reflecting and rephrasing, that could hurt. That experience could hurt a lot. And then the daughter saying, it did. But I kept telling myself I was the one he really liked. And the parent saying, you wanted so much to believe it. And the daughter saying, yeah, but it wasn't true. So here we can see that the daughter is starting to validate her own experience and the hurt that she is going through and went through in that relationship. But it's also providing her with an openness and an understanding of this actually wasn't, she kind of saw it coming. And, hopefully that this understanding that she's gaining right now will lead to, a solution for her to help build that resiliency and maybe move on from this relationship because she's understanding that it really wasn't a good relationship to be in to begin with. And so, this is a very cut and dry type of situation, and not every conversation is going to be this easy. But here you can get some wording and some phrases that maybe you can start to work into your own conversations as you talk with your children when they are going through a difficult experience or time.
So here's another example that as a parent of a 7th grader, I can really relate to. So in this situation, we're talking about ignoring feelings versus acknowledging feelings. A lot of times when kids present us with problems, we want to jump over the validating straight to problem solving, and that can really shut down the communication. So in this situation, the child says, oh no, I just realized that my report is due tomorrow. And the parent right away says, don't tell me you haven't finished it. And the child says, I thought I had till Friday. And the parent responds, well, that's what happens when you don't plan ahead. And the child responds with, but. And the parent responds with, no buts about it. Just sit down and do it. And the child understandably gets defensive and says, get off my back. And the parent says, don't talk to me like that. So you can see how when we place judgment and criticism on a child, the escalation is very easy. It's very easy for us both to escalate. When a child gets upset, then we get upset that they're upset with us. So when we ignore those feelings and focus on the problems without judgment and criticism, it's easy to see how situations can escalate without actually solving the problem. So this approach also doesn't open up the conversation to problem solving. So once we shut down the initial emotional expression, the child was clearly stressed or anxious, we close that door to communication. So another way we could ideally go through this kind of situation would be that the child says, oh no, I just realized my report is due tomorrow. Oh, I'm on the wrong slide. And the parent could just say, oh, and the child responds, I haven't even started it. Mm-hmm. The child says, I was going to hang out with my friends tonight. And this is where we can start to validate the feeling. I'm so sorry. That sounds disappointing. Because our kids know the expectations. They know they have to do their work. And a lot of our kids do put a lot of stress and pressure on themselves to begin with. So we don't want to add to the pressure, but just let them have that acknowledgement that you're in a difficult situation right now. And so then the child responds, this teacher is super strict. If I turn it in late, she won't accept it. And the parent responds, that sounds stressful, which it is. So in this situation, the parent allows the child to share their thinking, which shows that they're already feeling pressure to complete their work and a desire to be successful. So when we give our kids a time to express themselves without judgment and acknowledging their feelings, it helps them to take ownership over their own emotions and actions, as well as to move forward into the problem solving.
So lastly, we're going to talk about, give an example of going against your better judgment. Sometimes we err more on the leniency side, and we give in just because we think it's going to be easier or better for our relationship with our children if we kind of just let them do what they want instead of engaging in that power struggle. But obviously, we know as parents, sometimes for health reasons, safety reasons, it's not always the best idea to let them do what they want. So here in this scenario, that first line from the child is them asking to go play soccer with their friends tomorrow and saying, you know, my ankle doesn't hurt anymore. And the parent says, it's still swollen. The doctor said no soccer for 2 weeks. And the child says, but all my friends will be there and I promise I'll be careful. And as a parent, you know, we're thinking in the back of our mind, we know that they're going to play soccer and they're going to go all out, but we don't want to get into an argument right now. So we just say, well, if you're really careful and take it easy, and the child's just like, thanks, you're the best. And you're like, oh, I'm the best, but also they could get really hurt tomorrow when they go play soccer. So obviously this isn't the best solution. And so a better way to go about this conversation while still engaging in kind of a positive communication with your child is to accept the feelings as you redirect the behavior. So here we have, you know, the child asking again to go play soccer, and the parent, you know, trying to get on the same level as them and the same page saying, you know, I wish I could say yes. I really wish you could play soccer tomorrow, but your ankle is still swollen and the doctor said no soccer for 2 weeks. And the child says again, you know, but all my friends will be there, you know, really trying to push the envelope on it. The parent is like, oh, and you're stuck in the house? That's really rough. You know, not directly telling them that they're not going to play tomorrow, but validating those feelings that it's going to be really hard for them when they have to stay at home. And the child's like, but I didn't even get to play last week either. And the parent's saying, you know, you'll be so glad when your ankle is healed. Right now, the doctor's orders are to rest it as much as possible. And the child saying, like, this sucks. The parent's saying, I know. And so, you know, and this could be applicable to today too, you know, depending on, you know, what your family's decided in terms of social distancing. And, you know, maybe you're staying at home or quarantining for health reasons. And that could be a difficult thing, especially for an elementary school kid to understand of, you know, why do all my friends get to play together? Why do all my friends get to go back to school together, but I still have to be at home? And, you know, accepting those feelings, but, you know, that's really hard and that's really rough, you know, but as a family, you know, we need to make sure that we're healthy for so-and-so's sake or for your sake. So really accepting those feelings as you redirect the behavior that they're going to be staying home or they're going to be engaging in this appropriate behavior that you want them to do.
So now we're going to revisit some conversations, and this is your chance to participate a little bit. So I think we can all think of conversations that we've seemed to have over and over with our kids. And we wanted to give you a chance to think of what's the immediate thought that pops into your head, a positive or negative that it is, and then how might we want to rephrase that thought into something that's more validating. So in the first scenario, the child, you guys can't see it, it says, I don't know if I want to go to college. So I think some instant reactions might be like Katie said earlier, what do you mean? Of course you're going to college. Does anybody want to share in the chat maybe? What would be a validating response that you might be able to give to your child? Again, not necessarily agreeing, but just validating how they're feeling in that moment. What makes you say that? What are you thinking? It sounds like a really big decision. Exactly. I mean, I feel like kids in high school are really, tell me more about that, right? Kids are really trying to fight through, like, who are they? What's their purpose? What is college going to be like? It's so unexpected. So I want to hear, I hear that you're weighing your options. Tell me more about that. Or why have you changed your mind? So all of these are just open-ended questions that you're not shutting down what they're thinking. You're just trying to get them to share more. And exactly, what is it you want to do? So sometimes kids really have a clear vision of what they want to be doing in their life, and college isn't necessary for that, which might be hard for us if we really feel like we want that for them. But ultimately, it's the child's future. So we really have to get them to weigh the pros and cons of their decisions. Okay, the next situation, which I'm sure a lot of us can share, is why do I always have to take out the garbage? So negotiating, complaining about those everyday chores that really nobody likes to do. I can think of many instant responses that I might have in my mind, but as a parent, I have to hold those back and try to think what's really going to help the child resolve the situation. So what are some things that you might be able to say to your child to get them to talk more about that situation and maybe engage more in problem solving around it? So with chores, it's a little tricky because I think a lot of us just want to think, just do it. Just do your chores. We all have to do our chores. It's your job. You could just validate. I know how much you don't like it. Maybe tomorrow we can talk about rotating chores, but right now I need your help. So it's okay to validate the expectation, validate their feelings, but still maintain that expectation that they do their jobs. But it's important to engage our kids in problem solving so that way they're more willing to participate in these things. This is a way to help with family responsibilities. Do you have any other ideas? Why don't you like taking out the garbage? The next situation is a child says, I'm so worried. I think it's very easy for us in our adult world where we have control over our environment to say, why are you worried? You have no reason to be worried. I'm here to protect you. You're safe. But the reality is in that moment, for whatever reason, that child is feeling worried. And we really have to try to find ways to get them to explore that feeling and also being okay with feeling worried. Worried is a natural response for all of us to have. It's important. So it's important for kids to recognize when they feel worried so they can solve their own problems when they feel that way in the future. So what are some situations when your child might say, I'm so worried? How could you open it up? What are you worried about? Sounds like a big feeling to carry. Definitely. What's on your mind? And worry is a feeling that kids carry around a lot without saying anything. So even if you notice your child is feeling worried, you could even acknowledge, it looks to me like you're feeling worried about something. So sometimes we have to read their body language to try to validate what we think they might be feeling in this situation. And this is when open-ended questions are really helpful. So what's going on? Like some of you said, what's on your mind? And then acknowledging their feeling. I'm so sorry you're struggling. It sounds really hard. And the common statement that's going on right now, I hate distance learning. What are some thoughts that you might, for how you might respond to a child who's saying that would have a productive ending? You're not alone. It is hard. Definitely. What exactly don't you like about distance learning? Can you think of any positives about distance learning? Oh, really? Why do you say that? That sounds hard. Can you tell me more? Yeah. And it's okay to say, acknowledge, it's not like it used to be, is it? There are some things that are hard about it. Okay. Thank you, everybody. So the key takeaway is that you really have a better chance of being heard if you start by letting your kids know that they've been heard. We all feel the same way as adults too, that if we're really struggling with a problem, sometimes we just want somebody to listen and let us get our feelings out. And then if the person validates our thoughts and feelings and acknowledges the way we're feeling, it's amazing what a weight it feels off our shoulders just to feel that we've been really understood. And then you can still, we're not saying that you have to accept their behavior, but we're accepting their feeling, and then we can work with them to redirect the behavior. And rephrasing and reflecting is a really good way to do this. So just when they say those, I'm feeling worried about getting my work done, sounds like you're really feeling a lot of stress about your workload right now. So just restating what they're saying really helps children to know that you've heard them and you're listening. And also, if you're just showing genuine interest and approaching your child's comments with curiosity versus judgment, you're going to have a better chance of being heard when you start to work on problems with them. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about engaging cooperation.
So some of you guys might be thinking right now, okay, feelings, that's all well and good, but as a parent, I actually need to also get my kid to listen and do what I'm asking them to do after we talk about those feelings. And so this is actually a really particular important discussion right now during distance learning. It's probably the majority of my consultation, because now we're not just trying to engage cooperation with like regular home tasks, but as parents, you're also trying to engage them in their academic learning, which is something that's new for both you and them, probably, because it's not just homework, it's their everyday life at their distance learning computer, and that can lend itself to a lot of power struggles. And so a lot of the times right now, I'm talking with parents, I'm talking with teachers about how do I engage cooperation without getting into those power struggles every single day, because that's what's happening at home. So at home, we do a lot of making sure moments with our kids. And these are kind of like the check-ins. So maybe think to yourself right now, and it's individual for every kid. So what are the things that you have to make sure they do every single day? Like brushing their teeth, making sure they're not like falling back asleep after the alarm goes off, or making sure that they eat their breakfast, making sure that they're not wearing the same clothes 3 days in a row, making sure that they're wearing deodorant. We really appreciate that one in middle school. Making sure that they're starting their homework on time or logging into their Google Classroom, their BBCU link, making sure that they're not on their phone all night. And we do a lot of these check-ins, and that can lend itself to kind of some pressure being felt both on the child and yourself, because they're feeling like, oh, mom and dad, they're always trying to make me do all these things. They're always making sure I'm not playing video games too much, or making sure I'm doing my homework. And you as a parent, you're feeling that pressure of, oh, I'm always having to do these check-ins with them. And that can lend itself to maybe some negative interactions that build upon themselves as the days, the weeks, the months go on. And that's because we're using kind of these typical parenting strategies, and we all fall into them. I know like Michelle, probably even as a psychologist, she falls into this as a parent. I know I'll fall into this as a parent as well, as we get into these typical strategies for getting kids to comply. So we'll go through each one of these. So first, and you can kind of think to yourself, like as a parent, like, which one do I get trapped into doing a lot? And so the first one is blaming and accusing. And so for this one, like a parent might say to their child, like, oh, you left the stove on again and left the room. You could have started a fire. And what the child's thinking in that moment is like, stop yelling at me. Like, I know I made a mistake. And so they're not having kind of a positive reaction or a positive feeling or a helpful cooperative feeling to what you're saying. The next one is threats. This was a popular one for me growing up. And this is, something along the lines of, if you don't think it's important enough to do your chores, then I don't think it's important enough to give you your allowance. Or if you're not going to clean your room, then you're not going to go out with your friends tonight. And what the child's thinking is like, oh, I'll be so glad when I'm out of this house. I know that's something I thought of a lot. Like, I'm so glad when I'll be out of this house and I can just leave my clothes wherever I want in my room. So they're not thinking to themselves, oh, I should clean up my room or I should do my chores. They're thinking to themselves, oh, I can't wait to get out of here. Next is giving an order, such as, put your phone away, start your homework. This is probably a pretty common one. But the child's thinking, quit bugging me. Like, I'll do my homework when I'm ready. Like, they like that freedom, and it's hard for them to feel restricted. Next is lectures, or like moralizing a situation. So a parent saying like, I know you think it's funny to burp at the table, but it's actually bad manners. And whether you like it or not, people are going to judge you by your manners. And after like the third word, after saying like, I know you think, the child's just thinking, stop lecturing me. I know that this is about to go on for 5 more minutes and I'm just going to tune you out. I'm not going to listen to you anymore. The next one is warnings. You're giving a warning if you start off with the statement, I'm warning you. which I hear this one a lot, like in grocery stores or other places. I'm warning you, if you touch that, or if you say something like, I'm warning you, if you keep hanging out with Steve, you're headed for trouble. And what the child's thinking is like, you don't know better than I do. Like, you don't know anything about my friends. That's typically kind of the feeling or the response or thought that a child has when we give that sort of direct warning. Next is martyrdom. And my mom had 5 kids, so we heard martyrdom a lot. And that's when you say something like, I ask you to do one little thing and it's too much for you. I carried you in my womb for 9 months, or I put a roof over your head. I do all this for you. And this is the kind of thanks that I get. And the child thinks to themselves like, okay, so I'm just a terrible kid. Thanks for making me feel bad about myself. Like, you do all these great things and I'm just horrible. That's what kind of lends to that sort of thought process. The next is comparison. And this happens a lot with siblings when we compare them to each other. And so saying like, your sister never gets in trouble at school, or your brother's actually already finished with his homework. And the child thinks like, oh, you always liked her more than me. Or like, well, he's in first grade anyway. All he had to do was one math sheet. Like, that sort of comparison, it just leads them to get a little bit more defensive and not actually want to comply with what you're saying. Next is sarcasm. And we often do this because we're trying to build a rapport with them, and which can be helpful, but not in a situation when we're trying to gain compliance. And so we might say something like, so you want to go straight from basketball practice to the party without showering? Well, I'm sure you'll smell wonderful. And the child thinks like, stop talking down to me, because that does come across as pretty demeaning and pretty belittling. And now they're probably going to go to they want to prove you wrong. So they're going to go to the party smelling bad. And then they're going to be smelling bad at a party as well, which has consequences of its own. Lastly is prophecy. And an example of this is, saying something along the lines of, if you keep blaming other people for your problems, you'll never learn to take responsibility for your actions. And so when a child hears that, they're like, well, you're already prophesying my future for me. So I guess I'm just a loser. There's no hope for me. So why should I even try right now? This is also known as consequence parenting. And so that's like saying like, if you don't do this, or I can't believe you did this, and then we proffer some sort of consequence of what's going to happen in the future. But all of these strategies, it doesn't really teach your children to do anything but the same. So these really can't be the only tools in our parenting toolbox, because we want our children to learn to be persuasive. But how can they be persuasive if all we're really doing is modeling demands for them? So here are some strategies to engage cooperation. So instead of giving orders, what we can do instead is to describe the problem. So orders create resentment and they create resistance no matter who you're giving them to, especially if we're not wanting the order. But when we describe the problem, we actually invite the kids to become part of the solution. So like I said, I grew up in a big house. So when we got pizza, you had to eat as fast as possible, or you weren't going to get any. But if our parents were monitoring the situation, we might be given an order after taking an extra slice saying, put that back. But instead, what a parent could say is, it's a small pizza. There's only enough for each of us to have one slice. So what that does is it invites the child to be part of the solution and, put the slice back themselves without explicitly being told to do so. And then maybe offer some sort of, alternative, like, okay, if there's extras at the end, can I have a slice? So here you can see we're describing the problem. And next is, instead of attacking, describing what we ourselves feel. So because when we're angry, like I was talking at the beginning, we tend to lash out with words that can attack or demean them. And the result of this is that they're going to withdraw, or they're going to give some sort of counterattack. But when we actually describe what we feel, it's easier for kids to hear us and respond helpfully. It also models for them what they should do when they're angry. So when they're angry, instead of lashing out, you're modeling for them how to use what we call those I feel statements. So instead of attacking, which could look like, you're so irresponsible, I can never count on you to take out the garbage. Instead, you can describe what you feel and say something like, I feel disappointed or I feel overwhelmed when I ask you to take out the garbage and you don't. So again, you're kind of showing them, this is how I feel when you don't do this. And maybe it opens it up to them to say, well, I feel so much stress and pressure when you're asking me to do all these things. So you're actually modeling those behaviors for them, and you're not lashing out and constantly counteracting each other. The last one on this slide is, instead of blaming, to give information. So if you find yourself that you're blaming and accusing a lot, this could be a helpful way to rephrase some of those conversations. So blaming could look like asking the question, what did you do with my car keys? Like, your car keys are missing and you saw, Johnny buy them last night and you're pretty sure he took them. But instead of asking him directly, you could give information. So you could say, my car keys were here last night and I'm not sure where they are right now. Can you help? And so it invites them to be part of that solution and also assume responsibility for what needs to be done. And then here on this next slide, we have a few more strategies to engage cooperation. So instead of threats or orders, we can offer a choice. Many kids, they react to threats with defiance or solving compliance, but instead we can substitute a choice that meets both our needs and their needs. So going back to that soccer example, you could offer them a choice of, okay, you can go to soccer, but stay on the sidelines and hang out with your friends that way. So you're offering them a choice so they can choose for themselves, and you can avoid getting into that struggle. This helps a lot if you have a child who has autism or who has oppositional defiance disorder. They often like to be in control of the situation. And so offering them a choice, even if it's what we call a false choice, like, would you like to work on your schoolwork in the living room or at the dining room table? You're still getting their compliance in order to do their schoolwork, but they're getting to choose where they do it. And so it gives them some of that control, which is helpful. Next, instead of a long lecture, say it in a word. Like I said, kids tend to tune out long lectures. So short reminders focus their attention, saying things like socks, lights, phone, just those simple reminders that's, commonly agreed upon, by you guys that, they know when you say lights, oh, turn off the lights in my bedroom. Socks, oh, I have to put my socks on. It just gives them those helpful reminders without them tuning out or feeling like they're being lectured to or, given this long moral diatribe to. And then lastly, instead of pointing out what's wrong, state your expectations and values. So like anyone, when, something's pointed out wrong to them, a common response is to defend our behavior. But when we, state expectations clearly and respectfully, kids are more likely to listen. So instead of saying something, pointing out what's wrong, you are so mean to your sister, you could state your values and expectations clearly by saying, I don't like hearing insults in our family. When you want to say something to your sister, I expect you do it in a way that doesn't hurt her feelings. So you're really you're stating your expectations and the behavior and values that you expect to see within your family, instead of going straight into kind of what could be conceived as like an insult by them or something they're doing wrong. You're really clearly stating to them, what you expect to see in your household.
So to punish or not to punish. So what we are not saying in this presentation is that we should accept our children's behavior. They should still be expecting consequences when their behaviors are maladaptive. What's most helpful is when the consequences that we present them with are logical and relate to the behavior or the action. So what we call logical consequences. And we also want to engage our kids in problem solving so they have the tools to better handle these situations or feelings in the future. So one method to do this is going through this problem solving process where you engage them in the problem solving. So let's say this is a child who isn't keeping up with their chore of doing the dishes and is distracted by their phone. So we might start with stating your feelings. So I've noticed that I've asked you to wash the dishes and it's been 2 days. I feel disappointed because it seems like you don't care what I'm feeling. So I know we've talked about we don't want to do martyrdom, we use martyrdom, but it's important for kids to recognize that they have feelings, but we have feelings too. And just like our behaviors can impact our kids' feelings, their behaviors can impact our feelings. They need to have that awareness of that connection. And then go on to state your expectation. So I expect that as soon as we use the dishes, we clean them. And then go into the problem solving piece of showing them how to make amends. So next time we eat, I want to make sure that we're each doing our part and then provide them with that choice. So we have all these dishes that you could do now, or do you want to do all of the dishes after dinner? So you're still expecting them to do the dishes, but you're giving that choice of doing it right now or in the same day right after dinner. And so that's the action piece. And then you can take action. So if this continues to be a problem that's happening, you could say, I'm feeling frustrated because we've had this conversation before and it's still happening. So we won't let you have access to your phone now because we have all these dishes to do now. If the child's on the phone instead of doing the dishes. So logical consequences, you don't have access to that phone. And that's how you relate the consequence to the behavior. So another logical consequence might be until a parent might say, until you can show me that you can be responsible, you can't go to the party. And of course, kids are going to try to argue and negotiate. This is unfair. And that's when you can go back into the validating. I understand why you would feel that way. You really want to go to that party. And the child might start to try to negotiate. Well, if I do the dishes now, then can I go? But it's really important for us to still maintain limits once we've set them. So we could tell the child, well, allow them to do the dishes and then let them know that if you continue to do your dishes, then you can go to the next party. So the consequence still stands, but they realize that if they hold up the expectation, they will be able to have access to something that they wanted. It's also really important to recognize that punishment is the most effective when it's temporary. I've seen some parents take away all of their kids' toys for a week. And then the kids have nothing to work for anymore. They've already lost everything. So it's really important to, when we punish kids, that it really should be immediate and directly related to the situation. And we also want to pair it with positive reinforcement. So a child doesn't have access to the phone, they accept that consequence, and we then praise them and recognize that they did cooperate with the punishment. So, and they did adhere to the punishment. And the benefit of all of this is that we're going through the problem-solving process with them, and it's helping them to learn how to make decisions and solve problems in the future. So they will carry those tools with them. So working through problems together, this comes from Ross Greene, who is a well-known author of the problem-solving process. And this might be a little bit more relevant for kids who are really working through harder issues, like, do I want to go to college? Or in this situation that I'll share with you, it's a family who is recently divorced and they're trying to figure out how they're going to negotiate where the children are staying. And so this really helps kids to solve big issues. So in this example, a child is struggling with going to one parent one weekend and the other parent the following weekend. And so the child is saying, I just don't want to go with you this weekend. And you would want to start with inviting your child to give their point of view. And you might find out the child is saying, all my friends are at my dad's house. So this is where, when they start to share why they don't want to do something, a lot of their responses make sense. You can validate the way they feel as well as their thinking in that situation. So you can empathize and validate. But then it's also important to state your perspective and your concerns. So I can see that would be hard, and that makes sense. For me, my concern is that I worry I won't get the chance to see you if you're always staying with your dad's. And if we disrupt this cycle of dad's house one weekend, my house the other weekend, I won't ever have a chance to see you again. And then you can invite your child in brainstorming with you. And it's important to recognize that when you brainstorm, you're accepting all possible solutions without any judgment, no matter how crazy they are, because you're not necessarily accepting that in that moment. You're just opening it up to think of different solutions and write them all down with the understanding that you're going to go through that whole list afterwards to kind of pare down the choices to something both of you can agree on. So you want to evaluate and decide which ideas that work for both of you, and then put those into action. And one thing that's helpful too is just to work through the pros and cons of each of the situations. So you're not necessarily going to alleviate the concerns the child has. If a child is going to be sad that they're not going to see their friends every weekend, that is something that they're going to have to work through. But then you can recognize it, well, on some weekends you can still see them. And maybe we can work out some other solutions so that way you can still see your friends. And the more you solicit and respect your child's point of view, the more buy-in you're going to get and the more cooperation you're going to get. So the key to collaborative problem solving is collaborative problem solving. And not only does it help to solve the given problem, it also teaches your child to solve problems in the future. So maybe next time they'll come to you with solutions and ideas. If you have a child who's a little bit more impulsive, you might have to really emphasize those first few steps to help them get their feelings out. So you might say something like, we're going to start with you, and you can tell me everything you want to about this situation, and just let them get everything out and feel heard. Again, we're not validating the conclusion. So if a child says, like, if I'm not around on the weekends, everybody's going to hate me when I go to school because I'll have missed all the fun things. So you're not validating their thoughts. In that moment, you're validating how they're feeling in that situation. And you can say, I can see why you would think that and feel that way given what you're thinking in the moment. So we hope this has been helpful. Please know that we recognize changing the way we communicate with our kids takes a lot of practice, and it's never going to be perfect. But as with anything, the more we focus on identifying the feelings behind the behavior, the more successful we're going to be with communicating with our kids, and the more successful we will be in enacting long-term changes in their behavior, coping skills, and problem solving. And if you'd like more information, there's a book that we recommend called How to Talk to Kids. So How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, and Listen So Kids Will Talk. It's by Adele Faber and Elaine Maslish.
And I saw, I saw, Leah, you had asked, you have a hard time distinguishing between stating values versus like lecturing. And there is kind of a thin line there because you could start with stating your values and then venture into the lecturing. So what's important there is with lecturing, it's really more focused on kind of the consequence of what's going to happen. Rather with stating values, we're keeping it really simple and we're just stating the expectation. We're not going into the consequence of what's going to happen if they don't follow that appropriate behavior. I hope that makes it a little bit more clear.
That was really, really helpful. Great stuff. Always a great reminder for me. I know you got, we only have a minute left. I do want to mention and validate everything you guys are saying, and that I think a lot of this sounds easier when our kids are stating things in a calm tone, but that when we are stating things in ways that, you know, we, in the minute our kids say something in our brain, they shouldn't be speaking to me that way, you know, we get set off. And I think we want to circle back around to the beginning of the presentation as we leave this with everybody, that, you know, the first thing that Michelle and Katie said was that we need to take a step back and keep a pause between how we react to our kids, because a lot of times our kids, you know, almost all the time, our kids feel that their biggest emotions are the safest with us. So they're going to give all those emotions to us in a really, really big way. I think we just have to remember everything that you heard from Michelle and Katie really applies, and that we should just sit back and really look at the feelings they're having, so that we can maintain that relationship with them into their teens, and, you know, and as they're going through middle and high school, and certainly and beyond. Because the more that we create those withdrawals by having those conflicts with them, and the more they shut down, they think we don't understand their feelings, the harder it is to have that relationship. I also realized a few quick housekeeping things. I didn't say I'm Debbie Rosen. I'm the Study Pro, and Lindsay Toms and I are the owners of the Study Pro. And we both want to give the warmest of thanks to Michelle and Katie and everybody who came here today. We will send out a copy of the slides. I'm not sure what happened. They all looked fine when I uploaded them, but sorry about the titles. But we will share those and share this recording. And we hope everybody is safe and healthy throughout COVID and through this Thanksgiving season, and we can all show what we're think about what we're grateful for. So Michelle and Katie, you guys were really helpful today, and thank you for all the audience participation. So goodbye to all. Have a wonderful Thursday.
Thank you so much
everybody.
for having us.
Thanks for all the comments at the end.